There are people in this world who are not screaming for help, not collapsing under visible burdens, yet inside, they are tired not of life itself, but of existing inside a reality that feels heavy, repetitive, and emotionally exhausting. These are individuals who carry a silent fatigue, the kind that does not come from a lack of sleep, but from a lack of meaning, connection, and emotional nourishment. They are not weak, they are overwhelmed by a world that demands too much and understands too little. The tiredness they feel is not laziness, it is the exhaustion of pretending to be strong, the weight of unspoken emotions, and the fatigue of constantly holding themselves together. It is waking up each day not with excitement, but with obligation. It is not suicidal thoughts, it is an emotional numbness, a quiet resignation, a desire to pause life just long enough to remember why it mattered in the first place. They do not want to die, they want to rest. They want space to breathe without expectations chasing them. Such individuals are often deep thinkers, observers, and sensitive souls. They feel the world intensely. They see the emptiness in superficial living and the hollowness in constant busyness. They recognize the difference between existing and living, and that difference crushes them. They want depth in a shallow world. They want peace in a noisy society. They want meaning in a culture that worships productivity over purpose. Yet here lies their paradox. Beneath their tiredness is potential. Beneath their numbness is sensitivity. Beneath their withdrawal is a longing to connect with something real, to rediscover curiosity, joy, and a sense of why. They are not done, they are paused. They are not lost, they are searching. And sometimes the most powerful transformation begins not with motivation, but with exhaustion, because when a soul becomes tired of existing, it begins seeking reasons to truly live again. Their journey is not about escaping life, but about remembering life. It is about shedding expectations, softening the pressure they place on themselves, and learning to rebuild slowly, breath by breath, moment by moment. And if you are one of them, hear this truth: your tiredness is not your end. It is your turning point. When people say they are tired of existing, they are not talking about simple fatigue. They are describing a profound psychological exhaustion, a collapse of meaning, motivation, and identity. It is a silent battle, fought internally, where every day becomes an act of survival rather than living. This exhaustion often stems from prolonged emotional stress, unresolved trauma, constant self-criticism, and a deep sense of disconnection from purpose and belonging. Their mind becomes a battlefield of conflicting thoughts, a desire to move forward, yet a lack of energy to do so, a longing to feel alive, yet an emptiness that dulls every experience. They are not weak. They are overstimulated, emotionally burdened, and mentally drained by a world that demands constant performance without offering emotional rest. Their thoughts become heavy, their future feels foggy, and their heart feels like it's been carrying weight for far too long. In this state, life turns into repetition rather than progression. Each day blends into the next, with routines lacking meaning and achievements feeling hollow. They may wake up already tired, not because their body needs rest, but because their soul is exhausted from trying to hold itself together. They may withdraw socially, not because they do not care, but because they lack the emotional bandwidth to engage. Conversations feel tiring, smiles feel forced, the world feels overwhelming, and even simple decisions become heavy. It is not laziness, it is emotional depletion. They experience a psychological numbness, a state where they don't necessarily want to die, but they don't feel alive either. They exist in a gray zone, suspended between wanting peace and wanting purpose. At the core of this exhaustion lies suppressed emotion. Many people who feel tired of existing never learned how to express pain constructively. They bottled it up, stayed strong for others, pretended to be okay, pushed through life without processing what hurt them. Over time, that emotional armor becomes suffocating. The soul begins to whisper, "I can't carry this anymore." They may feel misunderstood, unseen, or unheard, like their existence has been reduced to functioning rather than being. And when you feel more like a machine than a human, you begin to question the point of life itself. Yet, beneath this exhaustion is a hidden truth. The soul is not giving up. It is calling for transformation. This deep fatigue is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of awakening. It means the mind can no longer tolerate a life lived for others, a life without meaning, a life built on emotional avoidance. It is the psyche begging for healing, rest, and rebirth. To move out of this state, one must reconnect with themselves, with purpose, with people who understand, with moments that create warmth in the heart again. Healing begins not with pressure to do more, but with permission to feel, rest, and rebuild. Slowly, one learns that being alive isn't about constantly fighting. Sometimes it's about breathing, letting go, forgiving yourself, rediscovering curiosity, and relearning how to exist gently. In the silence of exhaustion, the foundations of a new life quietly begin to form. For many people who are tired of existing, life begins to feel like a series of obligations rather than a journey of experiences. They fall into patterns where they live for survival, not fulfillment. Childhood dreams fade into adult responsibilities, and slowly, the spark that once made life exciting begins to dim. They move through life checking boxes, work, bills, routines, but rarely feel connected to what they're doing. This emotional fatigue isn't always caused by dramatic life events. Sometimes it comes from a slow erosion of joy, purpose, and self-worth. Every day feels like a repetition of the last, and the future seems like an extension of the same exhausting loop. When life lacks meaning, even the simplest tasks feel heavy, and the mind begins to question, what is the point? It's not that they don't want to live, it's that they haven't been given a reason to feel alive. In this mental state, the mind often becomes a place of constant overthinking. They replay regrets, analyze failures, and worry about outcomes that haven't happened yet. They feel emotionally stuck, wanting change, but unsure how to take the first step. This psychological exhaustion grows deeper when achievements don't bring satisfaction and rest doesn't bring peace. They may look successful externally, but feel empty internally. Life becomes a performance, not an experience, and every day feels like acting in a movie where they don't belong. The world keeps moving, yet they feel frozen inside, like time is passing, but they are not living. Isolation becomes a natural escape. They may pull away from social interactions not because they dislike people, but because they don't have the emotional energy to maintain engagement. They become observers of life rather than participants. Conversation feels draining, noise feels overwhelming, and solitude becomes their comfort, though it is not always peaceful. Some sit in silence not because they enjoy it, but because talking feels heavy, explaining feels impossible, and pretending to be fine feels exhausting. They drift away from others quietly, hoping someone will notice, yet fearing being misunderstood. What many fail to realize is that this emotional state often signals an unmet need for renewal. The psyche is not rejecting life. It is rejecting a version of life that no longer nourishes the soul. This fatigue is a sign that something inside desperately wants change, growth, and meaning. It reflects a deep desire for authenticity, connection, and emotional rest. People in this state don't need lectures about motivation. They need patience, understanding, and a safe space to rediscover themselves. Healing begins when someone gives themselves permission to slow down, breathe, feel again, and rebuild life based on what truly matters to them, not what the world expects. This phase is painful, but it is also a doorway. Behind the exhaustion lies a silent hope, a hope for a life where they don't just exist, but genuinely live, feel, and become who they were meant to be. For many individuals who are tired of existing, emotional numbness becomes both a shield and a burden. Life starts to lose color, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet fading of feeling. They don't always cry or break down, instead they stop reacting. Joy doesn't excite them, sadness doesn't move them, and even anger feels distant. It's as if the world is happening behind a layer of glass. This numbness isn't a lack of emotions. It is the aftermath of feeling too much for too long. The human mind, when overwhelmed by chronic stress, disappointment, pressure, or emotional pain, begins to shut down as a protective instinct. It reduces emotional sensitivity, not because the person is weak, but because their inner world has been stretched to its limits. And so, they live in a space where nothing hurts deeply, but nothing delights deeply either. People see them as calm or detached, unaware of the silent emotional freeze beneath the surface. This numbness also stems from a psychological exhaustion that makes caring feel impossible. Things that once mattered, dreams, hobbies, ambitions, become distant memories. They stop celebrating small victories and no longer feel fear of failure, not because they're brave, but because the emotional fuel that once powered hope and fear is depleted. Their internal dialogue shifts from, "I want to achieve this," to "Why does it even matter?" The mind, once active and full of imagination, slows to a survival mode where the bare minimum becomes the limit. Even rest doesn't feel like rest. It's just a pause from the heaviness. People may confuse this with laziness or indifference, but it is neither. It is the mind conserving energy, choosing silence over collapse, stillness over chaos. Ironically, emotional numbness can make someone incredibly self-aware. They know they are not fully present. They feel the void inside, even if they can't express it. They may look stable, functioning, fine, by external standards, going to work, interacting politely, doing what's required. But inside, everything feels muted. Their smiles are practiced, their responses automatic. They don't break down because breaking requires energy. They don't scream because screaming requires hope that someone will hear. They withdraw inward, living in a quiet limbo between wanting life to change and not knowing how to feel the desire for change. When numb, they often seek ways to feel something again. Some turn to music, nature, late-night thoughts, or isolation, not for sadness, but to find fragments of sensation. Others drown in distraction, endless scrolling, constant noise, routine after routine, hoping something will spark emotion again. But true reawakening begins with understanding that numbness is not failure. It is the mind's way of saying, "I have carried too much." Healing begins not with force, but with gentleness, allowing oneself to be human again, to rest without guilt, to seek small moments of meaning, and to rebuild room inside the heart for feeling. Emotional numbness is not the end. It is a silent pause before the possibility of rediscovering life with renewed presence and authenticity. For people who feel tired of existing, isolation becomes both a sanctuary and a silent prison. They withdraw not because they hate people, but because the world has become too heavy to face continuously. Social environments demand energies, miles, responses, emotional availability. And when someone is already mentally drained, even simple interactions feel like climbing a mountain. Home, solitude, silence, these become places where they don't have to perform life, where they can simply exist without explanation, without pretending. But this escape from the world is not fueled by arrogance or dislike. It is a weary self-preservation, a way to protect the remaining fragments of mental strength. Yet in this solitude, a paradox forms. They crave connection, but lack the energy to maintain it. They want to be understood, yet they feel too tired to explain themselves, so they drift quietly away from people, hoping someone will notice, but believing no one will. Over time, this isolation changes how they see themselves. They begin to feel invisible, not because others ignore them, but because they have faded from their own self-awareness. They stop asking for help, not out of pride, but from a deep belief that their struggles would burden others or go misunderstood. The longer they stay withdrawn, the harder it becomes to return. The mind adapts to silence, conversations feel unfamiliar, and social routines begin to rust. They convince themselves that isolation is the safest place, even as loneliness whispers louder in the background. They scroll through life rather than participate in it, watching others laugh, succeed, connect, thinking that world is no longer mine. This quiet detachment is not apathy, it is exhaustion painted as calmness. Yet underneath the desire to isolate lies a deeper truth. Their heart still hopes for a gentle presence. Not a crowd, not noise, not forced interaction, but one real connection, one person who understands without demanding performance. Isolation is not rejection of the world. It is a plea for peace in a world that moves too fast, expects too much, and rarely pauses long enough to see the silent battles behind tired eyes. And while solitude can begin as self-protection, healing begins when solitude is chosen, not forced by emotional burnout. The journey back is slow, one conversation at a time, one shared smile, one moment of trust. Re-entering life does not require sudden enthusiasm or energy, only the small, brave decision to let the world touch them again, piece by piece, moment by moment, until connection feels possible and existence feels lighter than before. For those who are tired of existing, time becomes distorted, not in hours and minutes, but in meaning. Days blur into each other, not because nothing happens, but because nothing feels worth remembering. They wake up not with purpose, but with obligation. Life becomes something to get through, not something to participate in. Every action feels mechanical: eat, work, sleep, repeat. This loss of meaning is not laziness, it is psychological fatigue. When the mind is exhausted, even joy loses its texture. Things that once sparked excitement now feel dull, conversations feel repetitive, and achievements feel hollow. It's not that they can't see the point, it's that they once tried to find the point so desperately, and nothing changed, so they stopped looking. This emotional numbness isn't sadness, it's beyond sadness. Sadness has tears, pain, expression. This state is quiet, flat, empty. It is the emotional equivalent of walking through fog. Everything seems close but unreachable. Hope exists, but it feels distant, like a memory rather than a future possibility. They hear motivation, inspiration, advice, but it passes through them like light through glass. People tell them to try harder, be grateful, stay positive, unaware that these words feel like asking someone with no energy to run a marathon. They are not ungrateful for life, they are simply exhausted by it. Instead of wanting more, they want less. Less noise, less pressure, less demand to figure it all out. They crave peace, not excitement. Simplicity, not stimulation. Their dreams shift from achieving great things to simply feeling alive again. And this is where society misunderstands them. We praise ambition, productivity, progress, but rarely do we pause to acknowledge those who are fighting just to stay here. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. In a world obsessed with chasing more, the tired soul only seeks rest, meaning, and a small place where existing doesn't feel like a burden. Yet underneath this emotional stillness is a quiet resilience. If they truly wanted to disappear, they already would have, but they remain, they endure, they wake up despite not wanting to, they survive days they don't feel connected to. That is not weakness. It is profound strength disguised as fatigue. And one day, when meaning begins to return, slowly, gently, they will discover that surviving emptiness requires more courage than chasing happiness ever did. So if someone feels tired of existing, the solution is not force, noise, or motivation speeches. It is understanding, patience, softness. It is reminding them not of what they should do, but of what they are worth. Meaning does not return quickly, but it always returns to those who wait with weary hearts and quiet hope. When people are tired of existing, emotional shutdown often becomes their survival mechanism. This is not a choice, but a psychological defense. At some point, the emotional system becomes overwhelmed. Too many disappointments, too much pressure, too many unprocessed feelings. So the mind begins to numb itself as a form of protection. Instead of feeling deeply, they begin feeling nothing. This detachment is not carelessness, it is fatigue. When the world becomes too heavy to hold emotionally, the brain reduces emotional engagement just to keep functioning. It's similar to a fuse blowing to prevent a fire. When emotions overload, the psyche temporarily shuts down to avoid breaking completely. Emotional shutdown looks like silence, disinterest, and withdrawal, but beneath it lies vulnerability. They aren't indifferent, they are overwhelmed. They care more than they can handle, so they stop expressing, stop expecting, stop reacting. Feelings once loud now become whispers. Love becomes numbness, sadness becomes emptiness, and anger becomes exhaustion. People often misunderstand this state as coldness or apathy, but it is actually a quiet cry for relief. It is not that they do not want to feel. They are afraid that if emotions return at full force, they won't survive them. Relationships become difficult, not because they don't love, but because emotional connection requires energy they no longer have. They may push people away not to reject them, but to avoid burdening them with their inner struggle. They crave closeness yet isolate themselves, hoping to heal in silence, fearing judgment, fearing obligation, fearing that vulnerability might shatter the fragile stability they are barely holding together. This emotional shutdown often appears in people who have been strong for too long. They held themselves together in storms, carried responsibilities quietly, endured pain without asking for help, and tried to be resilient when life demanded more than they could give. Eventually, strength without rest becomes numbness without choice. Their heart has been tired too long, and shutting down feels like the only way to stop the constant emotional bleeding. But emotional numbness is not permanent. It is a pause, not an ending. When given space, safety, and gentle connection, emotions slowly return. Healing happens in calm environments, not chaotic ones. Genuine understanding, non-judge, mental presence, and simple companionship can reopen doors that exhaustion had closed. These people don't need to be fixed. They need to feel safe again, safe to feel, safe to be vulnerable, safe to exist without being overwhelmed. So if someone appears emotionally shut down, treat them with patience, not pressure. Their silence has meaning, their distance has history, their numbness has roots. Instead of pushing them to open up, offer warmth, stability, and quiet presence. Emotional life will return when their mind no longer feels threatened by feeling. Sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from trying to break walls, but from sitting beside them until the heart remembers it no longer needs them. Many people who are tired of existing develop a minimalist relationship with life, not just in physical possessions, but in emotions, ambitions, and social expectations. To them, the noise of the world feels overwhelming, and so they begin stripping life down to the bare essentials. They don't chase excitement, they crave peace. They don't seek recognition, they seek relief. They aren't obsessed with status or proving themselves, because deep down, they are trying to preserve the little energy they have left. They choose simplicity not because they lack dreams, but because survival has become the priority. This simplicity often appears in the way they speak and act. They say less because they've learned too many words go unheard. They keep to themselves because social performance feels exhausting. They reduce commitments not out of laziness, but because they understand the cost of overextending themselves. They decline drama, avoid competition, and retreat from chaos. Their life becomes quiet, not a peaceful, romantic quiet, but a fragile, protective one. In this minimalism, there is both wisdom and sadness. They have learned life can crush those who always run toward it. So they step back to avoid being swallowed by its demands. Still, this simplicity is misunderstood. People may call them unmotivated or detached, but what they are really doing is conserving strength. They once tried harder than most. They once cared deeply, loved intensely, dreamed boldly, but constant emotional fatigue trains a person to live gently, cautiously, quietly. Their energy becomes precious, and they no longer give it away freely. Their life becomes like a small candle flame protected by cupped hands, delicate, guarded, flickering with hope, yet vulnerable to every draft of stress or disappointment. However, this minimalism also carries a hidden opportunity. When someone is forced to simplify life, they begin to notice what truly matters. Noise falls away, and truth becomes clearer. They learn to appreciate small, calm moments, genuine connections, and honest conversations. They value emotional safety over superficial excitement. They see through illusions that once captivated them. They stop chasing external validation because it feels empty. Instead, they seek inner stability, self, kindness, and slow healing. Their quiet life becomes a refuge, a place to rebuild, a chance to rediscover meaning gently rather than forcefully. Yet even in this simplicity, there is danger. One can disappear into isolation if it becomes permanent. The goal is not to remain invisible to life forever, but to return when strength returns. Healing is not a race, it is a gradual awakening. These people don't need loud motivation or aggressive positivity. They need gentle encouragement, a reason to believe life can be safe again. Eventually, the heart finds curiosity again. The mind finds purpose again. And life stops feeling like a burden and becomes a quiet possibility instead. When they rise wiser, calmer, and more intentional, proof that sometimes stepping away from life is not failure, but the first step toward truly living again.